Welcome to another episode of Grief Heals, the podcast where we explore how it is that grief heals us with our relationship with ourselves, with one another, and our whole wide world. I am your host, Lisa Michelle Zega, and I am excited to have another conversation. Hello, beautiful, glorious soul family. It is another episode, and this time the second episode of 2025. Wow, January 13th, 2025 is when, well, it's not when I'm recording. It is when this podcast episode will be released. So let's just take a moment to arrive right here, right now, breathing that in exactly as we are, feeling exactly how this feels. Like, what if, wherever you are, however you are, that it's just okay to feel and be in this space exactly as you find yourself, knowing that we cannot remain the same. We are constantly changing. That is one certainty, that we are changing moment by moment, day by day. Like, we never encounter, how about I say it this way? Every time we look in the mirror, we encounter someone new. And if that doesn't resonate, I invite you to look in the mirror and ask, what newness is here? What newness, what is different, what has changed? And we can do that, and I invite you to do that with all of the people you encounter, specifically those that are so familiar, you think you already know them. I am so curious what this experiment, should you decide to enter that adventure, I would love to know what you discover as you look intentionally for the newness, the difference, the change that is already taken place. Like, if you notice, how are you different from when you first started listening to this episode? What has changed? Yeah, just give that a little bit of attention and notice. Yeah, change is here. It just is. So I'm going to share with you that it is a Christmas present that I received that is inspiring today's episode. If you are not already familiar with the work of Tricia Hersey, the nap ministry, or the napping ministry, anyway, we will clear it up and put it the right way in the notes. She is an activist, a poet, a theologian, she has created a movement. She is big into rest as a form of resistance and creating the space to dream. Now, the person that got me this asked me if I had heard of her, and I said no. And it turns out I have, but I wasn't recognizing her name. There was just something familiar. So then when I went and looked her up, and I don't know where I heard about her, but let me just read for you, the beginning of the little pamphlet that comes with the rest deck that I got for Christmas. Welcome to your dream space, a space free from the oppression of the grind culture where you can hold on. Let me just pause and find my readers. That's going to be better. Okay. All right. Welcome to your dream space, a space free from the oppression of grind culture, where you can heal, invent, imagine, and find liberation. The rest deck is a tool for your rest practice. The intention of these cards is for you to see them as quiet portals for your deprogramming from grind culture. Grind culture is a collaboration between capitalism and white supremacy. It views human bodies as a tool for production and pushes an unsustainable machine level pace that disregards the inherent divinity in us all. I'm going to just stop there. There's more that she said, but again, this is Tricia Hersey, and what I'm reading from is her recent release called The Rest Deck. And there was something else I was going to share with you, but I'm not finding it, so we'll just leave that right there. And this deck is inspiring today's episode. So one of my practices for 2025 will be to engage rest as a way to deepen into life. You know, there is a saying in the coaching world, and I don't know where all else, right? But I learned it when I was being trained as a coach, back in 2010. What you resist persists. And when I think about that, the way that I imagine it is when I'm resisting, pardon me, I'm healing from a cough, a deep chest cold. What you resist persists. And when I imagine that, it's like what you push against gets energy. So even though the word resist is here, I am embracing my view of the world. And if you listen to the most recent episode, no, not the most recent episode that I want to say it released in December 2nd. So it was the last episode of December 2024. I talk about moving through versus pushing against, right? And what I'm talking about is the idea that everything lives on a circle. It's not the idea that we need to move as far away from grief, let's say, as possible so we can get to joy. What if grief and joy live on a continuum, on a circle? So at what point does grief become joy? At what point does happiness become sadness? It's sort of like when we go around in all the array, imagining a color wheel, all the array of what we experience, at some point we go through it, we go under it, we come out, and we're on that same continuum. That's actually what invited me to understand grief as love. So one of the things, and I don't know if I've shared this on a podcast, but I have this practice that I learned from Buddhism of 108 vows. Well, I have been, to count my vows, I do them to the Lord's Prayer. I say the Lord's Prayer a little differently. I say, Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, love be thy name. Love's kingdom come. Love's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day love's daily bread, and release us from love's debts as we release love's debtors. Lead us in love's way. Deliver us through hate. For love is the kingdom. Love is the power. Love is the glory forever and ever. Love reigns. And I've been playing with this prayer, right, in a way that just works with me, with my beliefs, my understanding, with my embrace of God. And when I would say, I was seeking, because I know my subconscious tends to not hold things in the negative. So as I pray this prayer, I'm like, how will I pray this prayer in the positive? So lead me in love's way, but then deliver me through, think about that circle again, through hate. There has been so much hate, oppression. There is hate, oppression. And if I'm looking on this circle, if we die to the ego and go in that darkness and emerge in newness of life, like being born again, we emerge in the consciousness of love. So may we be delivered through hate again and again and again, that deep work of spirit might be done in the ground, in the depths of the dark, that new life, beautiful experience. So how does this relate to Tricia Hersey and her work? Deliver us through the grind culture. I was raised, I'm going to say I was baptized in the grind culture. Even in the church, the one that seemed the most rewarded was the one who gave the most, regardless of what that was costing the family unit, regardless of what that was costing the individual spirit, regardless. The church has seemed, at least the church in the West as I've experienced it, I'm not going to speak on anyone else's behalf, has seemed immersed in this grind culture of capitalism and white supremacy, right? Ruled in these kind of tenets. So may we be delivered through. May we honor through. Now, how does this relate to a podcast called Grief Heals? The way this lives in me is, on the one hand, grief is the doorway that I entered. And I believe it's the doorway that many of us enter, because grief is not controlled. Grief does not succumb to the grind culture. Grief does not succumb to the ego, the performance, the patterns of how we've learned to survive. We may engage our grief in our survival patterns. We might utilize the tools we've learned, inherited through grind culture, to just push through, put on a happy face. If I'm honest with myself, that is how I engaged most of my losses, most of my life. And really, if that's you too, such compassion for all of us, because even our grief even our grief, we learned to engage through this system that treats us like machines that can go and go and go, regardless of what interrupts our soul or spirit, regardless of what sacred honor is calling to us, right? Did you know that when in the workforce, the typical bereavement period is something like 4 days? 4 days. And I don't think that that is paid, right? That just speaks and gives evidence to this grind culture that that is informed by capitalism and white supremacy. Now, Tricia Hersey is a Black woman, and why that is relevant. Think about slavery in the West. Think about chattel slavery. The most abusive, inhumane form of slavery, where the Black body was pushed beyond its means and exposed of when could no longer perform. How beautiful, how cleansing, how reflective of when death becomes life, of when hate becomes love, when extraction becomes giving. Because please think about this with me. For Tricia Hersey to offer us this gift, what was required of her? To stop, be still, stand in one place, allow herself, pardon me, allow herself to be, and in that ceasing, feeling into her pain, yes, and the historical pain of her ancestors who were not permitted rest and yet found a way to dream. And I'm just feeling this. The bravery, the courage, the beauty. And she leads these workshops where she invites us all to rest together. When we stretch out the way we view time, because sometimes we're looking at a segment so short that we're like, how can anything good come here? And please hear me. In no way is this justifying harm and saying, oh, it's all okay because good comes out. That's not what I'm saying here. And to recognize the new life that emerges and the beauty, like you've heard me say, and what we do when we are healing ourselves it's not just for us. We're recognizing our wholeness, that we can recognize the wholeness of our brother, of our neighbor, that we can experience the wholeness, the oneness of us all, healing ourselves, each other, and the whole wide world. This is how it happens. Tricia Hersey is reflecting to us all that when we stop, we go through the grind culture. We enter, like I'm thinking of Jesus right now, dying, entering the depths of the earth, and raising again in newness of life. I really think that being born again has so little to do with ascribing to a certain set of doctrines or beliefs, and so much more to do with dying the death, entering the depths of the earth, and emerging, just like the tree that's before me. If you see this on YouTube, it's like, yeah, the winter tree becomes barren. The leaves fall into the ground. They decompose. The nutrients are fed into the earth, and at some point rise again in spring, winter. Winter feeds, the death of winter feeds the life in the spring. So at what point does death become life? At what point does injustice become justice? And I really believe that grief heals. When we enter our grief, it is so courageous. And we rise. And it happens. It's the circle of life. It's the cycle. It's the seasons. It's not like and I think this was from the culture of capitalism and white supremacy. That idea that we're going to arrive. I cannot even tell you how much I have lived my life as trying to be good enough, be better, like a constant moving, trying, seeking to escape the process of dying and rising. And I'm only speaking for myself, but that mentality, after I became one who follows Jesus, that mentality was reinforced so deep in me, in my experience in the church. Now look, I am grateful for sacred gatherings. I am grateful for us experiencing community. And I really think that the life is like a cross-shaped life. And I have encountered Jesus more profoundly through Buddhist practices and teaching than I did in my 30 years in the pews of church in the West. And I encountered Jesus more profoundly when I entered my grief. And I feel like it was Jesus inviting me to enter my grief all along, that I might rise in newness of life, that I might understand the spirit of love, not just understand in my body, in my mind, in my spirit. So I'd like to say a big, bold thank you. Thank you, Tricia Hersey, and all those like her who enter our grief for our healing, for the healing of one another, for the healing of the whole wide world. Because look, we already are whole. We already are healed. And that's not always our experience. I lived from my deficit most of my life. And now I live more experientially whole, and I enter my pain more often. And it seems to me that in doing so, I experience more joy than I knew was possible to me. So I'm simply going to say this is how I came to understand, or somewhat of my experience of understanding in my mind, heart, and body, that grief heals. So if you'll just take a breath with me, because we breathe the same air. Yeah. And if you're open to a big, glorious hug or receiving one, just if you want to give and you're in a place to do so, open wide your arms. If you just would like to receive, just feel this big embrace coming in and around, and the nice, yummy squeeze. Oh. May we find rest. May we move through the grind culture and enter rest collectively in 2025.
You've been listening to Grief Heals with Lisa Michelle Zega. The podcast is produced by me, Eric Simpson, in association with Jump Up and Down Productions. Music by Ken Dalian, Drunken Nights to Sunday Mornings, and Stefan Carlin, A Calming Ocean, A Common Notion. If you would like more information about the work Lisa does, point your browsers to legityou.com. That's LEGITYOU. Lisa can also be reached at lisamichelle@legityou.com.